If your team's trying to move faster with AI or scale more efficiently without reinventing the wheel, InfoQ Dev Summit Munich 2025 this October 15th and 16th might help. It's a practical event, talks from people in the trenches, sharing what they've actually shipped, fixed, or learned. No big launches or buzzwords, just useful ideas you can take back to your team the next day. Learn more at devsummit.infoq.com.
My name is Srini Pinchikala. I am the lead editor for AI, ML, and data engineering community at the InfoQ website, and I'm also a podcast host. Thank you for tuning in today to this podcast. In today's episode, I'll be speaking with Mandy Gu, who is currently a senior software development manager at WealthSimple. She leads machine learning and data engineering initiatives at the organization. We will discuss the topics of generative AI and the large language models or LLMs, especially how these technologies are used in real world projects. We'll also talk about how different user profiles in the organizations influence the adoption of LLMs. Hi, Mandy. Thank you for joining me today. Can you introduce yourself and tell our listeners about your career and what areas you've been focusing on recently?
Thanks for the introduction. Excited to be here. So, a little bit about myself, as Srini mentioned, I'm currently at WealthSimple, where I'm supporting our data engineering and machine learning engineering teams. One of the things that we've been focused on for the past few months was building the infrastructure and internal tools to support GenAI adoption and usage throughout the company.
Yeah, thanks, Mandy. So let's talk about that. Like, can you talk about your experience in establishing AI programs in organizations? What typically the challenges are organizational, technical, and sometimes people related, so skill sets. So can you talk about what's your experience been and what you can share with our listeners?
Yeah. So the past year and a half to 2 years has been this really interesting time, like ever since ChatGPT blew up and ever since we pushed the boundaries of accessibility and just democratizing AI access. Things have changed very rapidly in the industry, and our AI strategy has really been centered around three things. So, the first is building up a lot of the LLM foundations and platform to support future work. And then from there, we find use cases within the company to apply this technology to boost employee productivity. And in doing so, we are also developing our confidence and guardrails and skill sets to bring this technology to our clients, where we can create a more delightful client experience by optimizing workflows using LLM. Most of my focus has been on the platform side and building up the reusable building blocks, and then supporting the teams in accelerating AI adoption for employee productivity, and also to find those use cases to optimize the client experience. I think one fairly meta challenge in rolling out these AI programs just has been how quickly the industry has been moving. We have pretty much a new state-of-the-art foundational model every 2 weeks or so, and OpenAI and all of these other companies are constantly releasing new things. So it's been a fairly intense process of just keeping up with these new changes in the industry and finding the best ways to apply it internally while dealing with a lot of different user profiles and towing the right balance between moving quickly and ensuring that we're making the safe way the default.
Can you talk about more about those reusable building blocks? Are they common solutions that other teams across organization can reuse, or?
Yeah. So on a high level, we have two sets of the reusable building blocks. The first are the foundational models, or access to the foundational models. And then the second is some of the components we use to facilitate other teams to build multi-stage retrieval systems. So for the foundational models, we're hosting a mixture of both open source models and some of the foundational models from fully managed services such as AWS Bedrock. So the way that we kind of tie this together is we've adopted a lightweight serving framework like LLM, and we've used this as a proxy server in front of all of these models. And then on top of this, we've been able to provide programmatic access that's integrated with the rest of our stack, so that any developer or any of our other services can kind of just seamlessly integrate and communicate with these models for whatever they need to do. We've also built a custom front end to recreate the consumer ChatGPT and cloud desktop experience, so that we're able to ensure that our employees are using these technologies, but in a safe and contained way. So that's the first set of the reusable building blocks that we offer. And then the second is that we have a lot of the platform pieces for both facilitating orchestration to update and read from our vector database, and integrating that with our various knowledge bases so that we can build internal RAG tools on top of that for both employee productivity. And in some cases, this has also been leveraged for back office workflows.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mandy. So for these solutions, like, can you talk about what are some of the business and technical use cases where the team leveraged machine learning solutions?
Most of the use cases so far has been internal, and a lot of them have been used just by various people within the business for their day-to-day tasks. We actually have fairly impressive adoption statistics. Close to two-thirds of the entire company use LLMs like in their day-to-day, and most of their interaction is through our LM gateway. So this is the front end that we maintain that talks to all of these foundational models and just lets our end users kind of pick and choose which models they want to talk to and base their chat experience there. When we look deeper into what some of these use cases are, a lot of the times it is for content generation. So people would write something and then ask the LLM to either proofread it, augment it, or to kind of continue or to generate content based on a prompt. We also have a lot of use cases for information retrieval, just people asking questions. And we've been able to integrate a lot of these models with our internal knowledge bases. And that way, people have been able to leverage it to ask questions about our company documentation and various of our internal knowledge bases as well. In terms of some of the workflows that we've been able to optimize, the most prominent one is for our client experience agents. So we've built a workflow where we're taking the Whisper model to transcribe a lot of our client calls. And in doing so, we're able to take this transcription and augment a lot of our current machine learning use cases in this space to provide classifications that we then use to triage these client calls to the appropriate teams.
And also, you mentioned about LLMs and the models. Can you talk about the generative AI programs implemented internally to improve operational efficiency and streamline modern tasks? Because Gen AI kind of brings more power, to the business requirements, right? So
Yeah, I mean, the biggest program that we've rolled out, this is something we've been working on for quite a long time now, is our own LM gateway. So, the motivation of having our own LM gateway as opposed to leveraging one of the consumer products out there is so that we can make sure that all of this interaction with the LLMs stay within our own cloud tenant and that we're leveraging like the foundational models that's hosted as a part of our VPC. So what this LM gateway offers is it's an internal web URL that all of our employees can go onto, and we have been refining this front end to resemble as closely as possible the consumer products that OpenAI and Anthropic offers. And there's a chat interface. And then we also provide like a prompt library and tools and ways of integrating, like just getting knowledge from several of our integrations, including with our internal knowledge bases. And the way that we've positioned this program is we want this to be everyone's first touch point with LLMs. We discourage the use of ChatGPT and these other products internally, or at least for work-related purposes, because of some of the security risks that comes with it and the need for a lot of our employees to work with sensitive information. So that's been one of the programs that we're working on.
no, that's good. So this LLM gateway looks like provides an entry point to different teams who could be using different large language models and maybe different vector databases, right? So is that one of the responsibilities of this LLM gateway?
Yeah, that's basically it. Like the motivation is really like getting as much exposure to these technologies as possible, but doing so with like the right guardrails in place.
Okay, and also, what are some best practices in terms of the life cycle of a typical Gen AI application development? Like we don't want teams to kind of go off in their own direction and sometimes either duplicate the efforts or kind of deviate from the standards. So, do you have any recommendations on what are the best practices?
I think the investment in the platform and in these reusable building blocks will ensure that we can bake in the best practices and how we want different teams to work with these technologies as a default. So for us internally, the way that we leverage our LLM gateway and the proxy server in front of our APIs, like this is how we point people to interact with the models. And this will avoid, for instance, somebody like directly interacting with the OpenAI SDK and potentially exposing our sensitive information that way. We've also been able to kind of configure and choose a lot of the optimal like configurations and ways of interacting with these models, as well as just prompt templates. And we offer them as configurations for the end users. Those are some of the ways that we've been able to ensure that we're operating like from a high standard when using these technologies.
Does the gateway also help with any what are called hallucinations or the accuracy of the responses, or is it more of a just a privacy and security type of checkpoint?
The main value proposition is more from like a privacy standpoint, but we do offer some ways of like dealing with the risk. We file these under specific models, but they're actually just leveraging some of the foundational models that we provide. But for all of the models integrated with our internal knowledge base, one thing that we'll do is actually return where it gets the information from. So this provides a way for the end user to kind of fact check the answer and build confidence that way. And by offering the ability to just ground the answers against context that we've curated and verified internally, that does allow us to ensure that the LM is at least reading this information from the right place. Outside of that, we've experimented and evaluated different prompt templates, and we've been able to find some effective ways of just instructing the LLM to return more reliable answers, although that's not a safe proof measure.
So do you run all the components of the AI solutions on-prem, or because this LLM gateway, would it also work against some API in the cloud, or?
When we first started, everything was, models that we served completely in-house. A few months ago, or actually like closer to a year ago, we adopted AWS Bedrock. And since then, we've actually been migrating more of our models from this internal like self-hosted stack onto AWS Bedrock. Bedrock does give us the ability to serve these models like within our VPC. So in that aspect, it's pretty much the same thing. But we have been migrating things to Bedrock just so that it's easier to manage.
You mentioned as one of the best practices is invest in a platform, right? So you mentioned the AWS Bedrock. Can you talk about any other specific technology or infrastructure changes that were put in place for this Gen A application stack? What are the technologies and tools that you used?
I mean, outside of the foundational models, there was quite a bit that we had to stand up for our retrieval systems. So we adopted a vector database, and then we also built a lot of integrations between that and our orchestration platform so that we could just ensure that the indexes were being kept up to date, that all of our knowledge base was being indexed on a periodic basis. So, from an infrastructure perspective, those were the two main things that we focused on. And then outside of that, we've been building just a lot of integrations between the various knowledge bases and different systems that this may have to talk to. One new development that's really taking shape this year is the MCP servers, having the ability to talk to like an API or an SDK through like a language server. And one thing we've been working on over the past few months is building up some of the infrastructure to support that.
Yes, MCP has been getting a lot of attention. So also the trend that's been getting a lot of attention are the AI agents. Mandy, do you have any comments on AI agents? What should they be used for? And when the teams, developers should not, kind of use that. It could be overkill or not the best solution.
That's a good question. I think it's very hard to say. And this is a space that's also changing very rapidly. There's definitely been certain spaces where AI agents have proven to be more effective than others. I think this is definitely an area that's worth keeping an eye on because with a lot of the advancements in integrating reinforcement learning with the way that we interact with LLMs, we've seen some like massive leaps in terms of ability and like relevant generations. So there's been a lot of developments in this space. I think the best thing we could do is to just make sure that we're evaluating and we have a well-defined success criteria in mind because regardless of the AI technology we're working with, there's always going to be use cases where it's really good at and use cases where it's not so good at. And that's something that's been quite in flux with Gen AI.
Yes, we have to kind of wait to see how it goes. In terms of the adoption of LLMs and the AI programs, the different organizations will definitely experience different levels of maturity and the commitment from the employees and the leadership. So, can you talk about? I know you mentioned about this earlier, the different user profiles and how different user types can influence the usage of inside the LLMs, and what insights you can share that our listeners will be interested in who may have some similar situation in their own projects, like how do they need to manage the users and user profiles to get the best out of LLM adoption.
So I think with all new technologies, there's about 3 to 4 different user profiles. And certainly this has been true for LLMs and generative AI. From my experience, LLMs have been a very divisive topic. There's those who love it, there's those who hate it, and there's those who just absolutely cannot stand it, especially like in a workplace setting. I mean, starting from like one end of the spectrum, you have like the advocates, like you have the people who are really excited about these technologies. They're the ones who are proactively experimenting with the new foundational models, the new tools that come out, and they'll be really proactive in just finding ways of applying these technologies. Like, hey, maybe I can use this as a part of this work that my team does. I mean, I think the risk of working with these people is that they may set unrealistic expectations about the benefits of LLMs or downplay the other risks, such as security or privacy. But these are the people who are going to be very engaged, who's going to be very eager to adopt new tools and try new things. And then on the other hand, like there's a lot of people who are detractors of generative AI, like they're very distrustful or critical of this technology. And they're going to be very focused on the negative sides, whether it's the ethical concerns, the security concerns, or the environmental concerns of training these models. And they're not going to be as receptive to org-wide mandates to adopt LLMs. I find with these people, giving them the space to address their anxieties, being very transparent about your expectations of them, I think that's going to work well in getting them to a place where they're still skeptical, but not as much of a detractor. And I think for most of the organization, they're really going to fall somewhere in the middle. There's going to be people who are, very curious, but may not be completely like sold on this new technology. And then there's going to be people who are more skeptical. And I think for this group, they're going to need some faster feedback loops to see more value. And again, that transparency from leadership to address any AI anxieties.
Definitely. Also, can you talk from your experience any specific metrics or indicators to bring all these different users together? Like you said, some team members may want to see some like metrics, before they can fully embrace the AI programs, right? So, do you have any recommendations on that?
Specifically for these users, I think it's going to be fairly specific. Like if you're a developer, the metrics that you care about are going to be very different than if you're someone who works in operations. I think if they're able to see the metrics that are related to their work, so maybe for like a developer, like how much faster they're completing tickets or minimizing like the number of touch points to work with other teams, for instance. I think those are some of the metrics that they would like to see. And then these metrics will likely be quite different for other teams as well. I actually found that, well, one, it's actually really hard to put together these metrics and to like really show the value this way. But I've found with a lot of people who are a little bit more skeptical that, and this doesn't always work, but it's really making sure that they try the technology at least once and like giving it a chance, like taking something that they do day to day and then applying it with some of these new tools. I find that's usually a good way of showing people like, hey, this actually works, or like this may actually help like with my day to day.
Definitely, it will be different for each different type of users, right? So, also, can you talk about any like education or training programs you may have kind of developed to improve the skill sets of developers who are interested in using AI right away, or even to making the others aware of the value of AI solutions compared to the traditional software development solutions? So, do you have any recommendations on like what kind of education and training programs the other companies should consider?
Yeah, so there's a few different programs that we're running right now just across the organization, and some of them have definitely been very successful. So we've been having like within different pockets of the organization just weekly demos. And they can be something really small, like this is a workflow that I'm now using an LLM to do, or maybe I'm trying a new tool, or maybe like I'm trying just like a new way of doing things. And that has been a really good way of getting people to see the value of some of these new technologies. And it's been a great source of inspiration as well, like seeing your team, like where your teammates are getting value with, and then on the other hand, where they may be struggling. So one of the rituals is having these like regular demos in place. We've also been able to leverage like asynchronous communication, like via Slack and like other forums, like quite effectively. So again, very much focused on just like sharing some of the work that's come out, but not just the good things, like even just sharing like the AI fails and like the WTF moments, like with these new tools. I think that brings a certain like human side to it. We've also had a lot of our leadership team, like including our CTO, kind of just come in and do like ask me anythings and provide like that open space for people to ask questions. And that I find has just been a really effective way in addressing a lot of the anxieties around AI. Because for people who are distrustful of this technology, like without the necessary context, like they will think the worst case scenario. But once they actually hear about the vision, the strategy, it's a lot easier to address those anxieties.
You mentioned about WTF moments, right? So can you talk about some of the lessons learned or any other insights you can share on some of the roadblocks the companies typically run into when they are trying to embrace machine learning and AI solutions, and they're trying to establish the programs? What kind of lessons learned you can share?
I think one thing that comes to mind is just given how fast this space moves, it's going to be really hard to keep up with like the latest and greatest technologies. And this was something we struggled with for a long time because we would be building something fairly cool or bringing a technology internally. And then 2 weeks later, like OpenAI would release a new model or a new way of doing things. And then at that point, we would ask ourselves, like, do we continue what we're doing or do we just pivot to the next new thing? Oftentimes, like, it was hard to fight back the urge of pivoting. And this created a lot of work in progress, and it created a lot of times where we were putting in a lot of effort, but we weren't really seeing the results or delivering the value that we had hoped. So I think the insight that shows up here is, bet on the racetrack, not the horse. In a lot of the cases, it's better to get started with something than to spend the next 3 to 6 months like trying to chase the latest thing. So I think that's one thing that shows up. The other one is that, whether or not you like it, AI is happening. Like people internally are going to be adopting it. The people we work with externally are also going to be adopting it. And in some organizations, in a lot of cases, like this is going to be on your clients' minds as well. So every single organization, regardless of which stage they are in their AI journey, they need to think about how to deal with the inevitable AI, like you can call it a revolution if you will, but like this thing that's happening. And this is kind of showing up in a lot of smaller ways too, right? Like for instance, there's a lot more softwares right now for job seekers. There's a lot of AI assistants that helps them like with interviews or that helps them like with do coding assistance. And this is something that your hiring team will need to tackle to get on top of this, but also making sure that, we're still evaluating our candidates, note the way that we intend to as these new tools are surfacing. So I think those are two of the lessons that kind of shows up. And then maybe just the third that's kind of relevant to the intersection of like development and AI is that as we're getting really excited about all of the advancements in this space, a lot of what we need to do to be like a successful like R&D organization will still be relevant. So for instance, like fostering a culture of writing clean code, like that's going to be something that, helps both the traditional way of doing things, but also if you want to apply AI like code assistants or other tools to your code base one day, that's also going to be what you need from like a foundational point of view.
Yes, that's the kind of main thing, right? So a lot of the tasks that are more boilerplate code kind of thing, right? So I mean, the developers, we should never have been kind of working on those anyway. So now we can use the AI tools and agents to help us with automating those tasks, so we can focus on the creative side of the software development, the design, the technology additions, and the customer interaction, right? So more of those things. Thanks, Mandy. So there are a lot of interesting topics we talked about. Thank you very much for joining this podcast. It's been great to discuss machine learning and Gen AI, especially from the perspective of adoption of these technologies in the real world projects and what has worked for you and what didn't work. To our listeners, thank you for listening to this podcast. If you would like to learn more about AI ML topics, check out the AI ML and data engineering community page on InfoQ.com website. I encourage you to listen to the recent podcasts, especially the trends reports that we publish on different topics like architecture, AML, culture and methods, and also the various articles we publish on all of these different topics. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Mandy.
Thank you.